It's the World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Aaron Zaleski will be with us shortly, I promise you. In the meantime, here with us is Dave Clark, diplomatic correspondent for AFP.
Good evening.
A former regular here.
Yes, I used to live in this fair
Now
town.
you live in Washington. A lot's happened since you've left. You know, there's been a vote of Brexit. There's we have a new president.
It's been a busy few years, but we had some things happen in Washington, D.C. as well.
We'll talk about those later.
We'll touch on those, I'm sure.
All right. We're also with Christian Wernicke, Paris correspondent for Süddeutsche Zeitung.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to Ida Lamy, contributor for the New York Times World. Welcome to the show again. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. For many, she should have been France's first female president. 2 weeks shy of her 90th birthday, Simone Veil has died. Auschwitz survivor, lawyer, the European Parliament's first president. That was back in 1979. She was, in 1974, the health minister who stood firm in the face of bitter resistance and pushed through the bill legalizing abortion in this country.
I would like to share the beliefs of a woman, and I apologize for doing it in front of this assembly, mostly composed of men. No woman gladly resorts to an abortion. All you need to do is listen to what they say.
I've been listening, we say hello to Aaron Zaleski, who joins us now. Paris traffic couldn't keep her away. We were listening there to Simone Veil's remarks of 1974 ahead of that bitter battle over abortion, and you realize just how much France has changed in the interim.
Right. I mean, her legacy is pretty incredible. She's a role model for so many feminists and so many people fighting for women's rights. And it's also a reminder that, you know, the fight hasn't finished. Women still have to preserve their rights. They still have to keep the struggle going. This very specific right, which is abortion, is still under debate in so many places in the world. It's still not something that is secured forever.
I heard a feminist representative of a feminist organization reacting to Simone Veil's death and reminding us that a woman dies every 9 minutes around the planet from an illegal abortion.
Exactly. And even in places where it's legal, like in the U.S., if tomorrow someone like, let's say, Justice Kennedy was to resign, you never know what could happen to Roe versus Wade. So it's really not something that, you know.
The legacy of Simone Veil is pushing through this bill in 1974 against, again, it seems obvious to us, but at the time it was far from obvious. And people were telling her at the time that it was eugenics, what she was trying to push through, that it was another St. Bartholomew's massacre. And this to a survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camps.
She was really remarkable. She was ahead of her time in many respects with the abortion rights issue. She was also a strong supporter of Europe. One of her arguments was, as a Holocaust survivor, Nazi Germany is what happens in a fractured Europe. So she was behind a unified Europe for quite some time before the rest of the world got on board.
It was because she'd survived deportation, as you say, at age 16, that she believed in European unity, becoming the first president of the European Parliament. That was in 1979. At the time, Christian Wernicke, there were 9 nations in Europe, not 28, soon to be 27. And Simone Veil, after she retired from political life, she's admitted to the French Academy, the Académie Française. She makes a speech where she quotes Victor Hugo, who in the 1840s had spoken in favor of Franco-German unity. And Simone Veil always was in favor of looking at the past in that light, and the light of remember the good, not the bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's, for me as a German, was the touching point, probably also for me as a German man, so I may underestimate the big step she made for France in getting the abortion law passed. But as a German, I have this feeling of gratitude that she, as somebody who went through hell a hell that was built by Germans, gave Germany a second chance and helped to build what we now know as the European Union, and what so many people today underestimate as its value. I mean, she also reminds us, her death reminds us what we have built, how far we've come. And without people like her who could use the past as something to build a future, without those people we wouldn't have gone this long way.
Simone Veil, who hit a glass ceiling in French politics, and
It's just, at a time when we're talking about a renewal in the French political class, after a 39-year-old president has brought with him a huge wave of new members to the National Assembly, including a lot of female members, we're reminded that Simone Veil was in 1974 was almost alone in that chamber when she made a speech about abortion rights. But these debates haven't ended, and the new generation of politicians will have to grapple with some of them. In my own country, the United Kingdom, we were still discussing abortion legislation just yesterday, because in Northern Ireland, you can't get an abortion on the National Health Service, and women from Northern Ireland, full UK citizens, were travelling to the mainland to exercise their reproductive rights, and they were being charged for it. So Prime Minister Theresa May is just now correcting that to avoid a confidence vote in her own parliament, because she wants to bring the Democratic Unionist Party into a coalition in order to have a working majority.
yeah, we'll talk more about that later. That issue of how relevant it is, relevant when it comes to the issue of abortion, relevant when it comes to the issue of Europe, and yeah, it's talking about social values, family values is an argument that's been going on in Germany, and it's been a historic day for many there after Parliament, by a wide margin, approved gay marriage, which, barring a surprise from the upper house, which brought the bill in, so there shouldn't be one, or the Constitutional Court, will soon make same-sex marriage the law of the land as it is already in 13 European nations. Angela Merkel voted no, but she acted as the trigger when, during a forum hosted by a women's magazine, and this was just earlier this week, someone in the audience asked when he'd be allowed to marry his longtime partner.
Sicherlich auch natürlich für diejenigen,
For
die
those
kirchengebunden sind,
attached
noch
to the
einiges
church,
eine Rolle.
it surely
Und
plays an
deshalb
important role,
möchte ich
which is
gerne die
why I
Diskussion
would
mehr
like
in
to
die
lead the
Situation führen,
discussion
dass
more
wir-
into a
dass
situation
es
where it is a
eher
question of
in Richtung
conscience,
einer
rather than
Gewissensentscheidung
something
ist,
I
als dass
push
ich
through a
jetzt hier
majority
per,
vote.
Mehrheitsbeschluss irgendwas durchpauke.
A question of conscience, Christian Wernicke, she says that, and the floodgates opened fast, because that was Tuesday, today's Friday, and the bill's been passed. And some people are asking, was this her Schabowski moment?
I was about to say that. Yeah, somebody said that
Just
today
explain
in the
to us who
parliament.
Günther Schabowski was.
Günther Schabowski is the pronunciation. Sorry.
Schabowski, excuse me.
He was a member of the Socialist Party of Socialist Unity in the former GDR in 1989, and he got, during a famous press conference, he got a small piece of paper, and that was handed to him. He didn't know what he was reading, and then he didn't really understand the message, and he said something, well, I just learned that starting from tomorrow, people will be allowed to leave the country freely. You have travel freedom, and that was the night when people went to the Berlin Wall and the wall came down. That was in November 1989 by SB.
Right, so he bumbled
Communication
he
error.
bumbles his way into
Yes.
history. Was this bumbling on the part of Angela Merkel, or was this
I'm not so
carefully
sure.
calculated?
I mean, I'm not so sure because she is a tactician, and we know that there's a campaign coming up. The Social Democratic Party and all from the left, and certainly the Green Party, were using this issue as a campaign issue, and by taking away the issue, by taking it away from the table, she has a clean plate again.
All right, she's no Günther Schabowski, you're saying.
It wasn't just the rival of political parties. It was also the average German voter. The majority of Germans are in favor of same-sex marriage, and I think that this was an election tactic on her part to appeal not just to the potential coalition members, but also to the average German.
And that's an important point. There's the sense with Angela Merkel that she's never ahead of the curve. When it came to shutting down the nuclear power plants, when it came to letting the refugees in 2015, she moves when public opinion is moving.
Absolutely. I mean, I think over 80% of Germans are in favor of same-sex marriage. So yes, I think it's like this awkward electoral dance that she's doing, but it's surprising that Germany is only now passing this.
Do you sense there's no fire and brimstone with her?
There's no fire and brimstone with her, but she leads a Christian Democratic Party by name, and she did vote against the law after triggering it being brought forward by either on purpose or by mistake. It reminds me of when Joe Biden came out ahead of Barack Obama in being in favor of gay marriage in America. Barack Obama in his first campaign was against it, and Biden, in an apparently unguarded moment, got ahead of the administration by saying that he was in favor, which effectively bounced Obama into it. We forget, I think, just how quick legislation has changed in the West. It might seem very natural now, and as you say, 13 countries in Europe, a lot of countries in Latin America, which historically has been regarded as conservative, many states in the United States now. This has all happened in a very rapid space of time. I mean, Barack Obama campaigned against it. Hillary Clinton changed very late in her career as well in favor.
How fast has Germany changed?
This was overdue. This change was overdue. People were asking it for years.
Yeah, because you've had civil unions since 2001.
Yes, 2000. And much was done actually by the Constitutional Court. So, in a way, going back to the Schabowski moment, Merkel, until Monday, was the wall behind which we saw a sea rising, and then the wall went to the side and the thing went through like a flood. I mean, you hardly have that. Within 1 week you change this legislation. But there is no real danger for her, because there are a few people on the extreme right who will vote anyway for an anti-European, anti-immigration party called Alternative für Deutschland. But apart from that, this will not come at a big political cost for her, I think. So.
I want to revisit what Dave Clark was talking about, how when it comes to social issues, what we take as a given is not always the case. In the case of the United Kingdom, the British House of Commons, it could have brought down Theresa May's brand new government the issue of abortion. The legislature approving her conservative agenda as spelled out in last week's Queen's speech, but only after the pledge to pay for, as Dave was mentioning, women in Northern Ireland to come to England for abortions. Northern Ireland, one of Europe's strictest abortion laws. The government's concession to ward off an amendment that gained momentum after Theresa May struck that alliance deal with the socially conservative DUP party, one that includes this £1 billion pledge to fund infrastructure in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, this Conservative austerity government is very much in favour of handing out large sums of money to the government of Northern Ireland, not obviously to the governments in England, Wales or Scotland, because that would be ridiculous. It's a grubby deal. She's a weakened Prime Minister who called an election she didn't need to call, and which wasn't a popular call, and has ended up weakening herself, and now she's put ourselves in the hands, effectively, of the Democratic Party of Ulster. I'm always very dubious about any organisation that feels the need to put democratic in its name, but they have become a kind of Trojan horse into mainland politics on this issue of abortion, and then also in other issues. The Northern Ireland parties, for historical reasons, you don't have to declare the names of your donors. Now, this was to protect them from paramilitary assassinations during the troubles of the 70s and 80s. But now it's being used in order to ship money through the DUP to further far-right and conservative causes, including on the mainland. And a lot of the money that went into the Brexit campaign was shipped through the DUP in order to conceal its origin. And I hate to get into conspiracy theories, but we haven't got to the bottom of that yet.
Haven't got to the bottom of it. And on this issue of social issues and the social values, they say it's making a lot of conservatives uncomfortable, an alliance with the DUP. How uncomfortable, though?
Well, not uncomfortable enough to not vote through Theresa May's Queen's speech. She's now commencing what could be a 5-year government if she doesn't lose any more votes coming up. I think this uncomfortableness goes in two ways, however, especially in the wake of the Brexit vote and the vote in the United States. Angela Merkel had a big wall of support behind her for allowing the vote on gay marriage to go forward. But if the mainstream conservative parties get too far ahead of the conservative electorates, then parties like the DUP are picking up support. Parties like UKIP pick up support. If the, to use the terms of Steve Bannon's people, the globalist elite right are pro-gay marriage, are pro-abortion, if they go too far ahead of ordinary right-wing voters, then you end up building up support for fringe movements.
We're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Aaron Zaleski, Paris correspondent, was welcome back. Welcome back as well to Dave Clark, diplomatic correspondent for the French news agency AFP, in Paris for the week, usually in DC. As well, Christian Wernicke, the Paris correspondent for Süddeutsche Zeitung, and Aida Alami, a contributor to the New York Times World. We were talking just before the break about this, tenuous agreement between the Conservatives and the DUP, an agreement that involves cash. Dave Clark picking up on the adjective that's been in most newspaper headlines, like that of the Daily Mirror on Tuesday, grubby. And is this too much, Dave, calling the DUP crackpots? Isn't that taking it a bit far?
It is possible that the Earth is only 6,000 years old and that dinosaurs and global warming are a hoax, but I think the majority of the British electorate would think that the DUP's primary policy positions are out there.
Yeah, but some have said that the railing against that is sort of an anti-Irish sentiment, even though the DUP.
Well, if you called them Irish, that they would take that as an anti-DUP sentiment. They are very loyal to the British Crown. The DUP.
There isn't a whiff of snobbery on the part of the English when they look at Northern Ireland.
Oh, there's a lot of snobbery when we look at Northern Ireland, but a lot of it is because of people like the DUP.
All right. The other cartoon we'd like to show you is one by Dave Brown in The Independent, and there you see May's willingness to pay for the alliance with the unionists, but more miserly, it seems, when it comes to police, fire, and nurses' pay. And of course, this is all coming in the context, Aaron Zaleski, of the Grenfell Tower fire. The head of local council has just resigned, and there's a real debate in the UK about the government, after 7 years of austerity, letting down public services.
Exactly. There was a recent article in the Daily Beast that sort of that said that this fire was Theresa May's Hurricane Katrina moment. For those who don't remember, about 10 years ago, there was this massive hurricane that just devastated large portions of New Orleans and had a terrible impact specifically on low-income minority communities. And we sort of see this as an incarnation of Hurricane Katrina, in that it was low-income people affected in a very prestigious neighborhood. So it really showed the class divisions in the society, and in the way that people feel that just the government has turned their back on this segment of society, because there had been complaints in the tower for months about safety issues, and there was no action.
Turn their back on society, or turn their back on public service and the idea of government.
Absolutely. It's just there's this, I completely agree with what you just said. People just feel completely left out, and it's everywhere. It's happening everywhere, and people governing need to start realizing that eventually.
So how does the EU handle Britain right now? When you're seeing this internal fight that's going on, this floundered idea of a snap general election. We had a guest on yesterday, Christian Wernicke, who said a weakened Theresa May is not in the interest of the EU. It's better to have a strong leader on the other side of the table when we do the Brexit negotiations.
According to what I hear, I'm not based in Brussels anymore, but I mean, they just don't know with whom to negotiate. I mean, who is clearly having a mandate is May still having a clear mandate to do so? And what is her position? So far, I mean, there are even cynical suggestions it would be good for the British if Monsieur Barnier, who was the chief negotiator for the EU, would negotiate with himself, because he at least has firm positions and he has a clear understanding of what could be a compromise. So far, I mean, look,
could there be another
from a more global, broader point of view? For me, when I was educated, British politics was for me pragmatism, rationality, something that we as Germans could learn something from. This is crazy what we see there, and it's corrupt. The deal with Northern Ireland Party that's corruption.
Is there the feeling, though, that with the way the vote went, Dave Clark, that the British are toning down the ideology and the more ideologically driven politics that we saw during last year's Brexit campaign?
They might well be, as politicians, toning down the ideology, but the process is in motion now. In 2 years' time, we come out of the European Union with or without a deal. So we just cast adrift and we trade with Europe on World Trade Organization rules if we haven't cut some kind of new free trade deal with our former EU partners within the next 2 years. So a weakened Theresa May can't negotiate a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. It'll just be out if she's not capable of formulating a position. So if people in Westminster are softening their views or looking for new ideas, it's a little bit late in the day. They should have a menu that they want to show to Mr. Barnier by now.
All right, Theresa May, who has one less thing to worry about, at least for now. She's put off that state visit for Donald Trump that raised eyebrows. Here in France, this was the week we learned it was time to ready the red carpet for what many are billing as a rematch of that handshake, the one where Emmanuel Macron bragged about staring down the U.S. president last month. This time they'll be sitting side by side for the Bastille Day military parade in Paris, which, by the way, this year marks the 100th anniversary of U.S. soldiers entering World War I. I mean, when you look at Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron, both new presidents, both who've gotten to power in unconventional ways without the help of big party machines. What do you think the chemistry is going to be between those two guys?
That's a good question. I think that Macron is trying to position himself as a leader of a European leader, a strong leader, and he kind of want to build bridges with Trump after kind of a rocky start with the Paris Agreement and Syria and other things. I do also think that Trump never forgives or forgets, and I think the make the planet great again is not something that Trump is just going to get over.
Shouldn't have said that?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, Trump never forgives, these little things.
Well, there was also Trump's comments a few months back, something along the lines of, well, Paris is no longer Paris, when he was speaking about a friend of his visiting. That makes it particularly amusing. And then there's also the fact that Trump rooted openly for Marine Le Pen, the rival of Macron. So that, I think, adds fuel to the fire a bit.
By the way, this Thursday in New York, the new French finance minister tried to woo investors by alluding to Macron's, strong leader ambitions as well, and his talk of a Jupiter-like presidency.
Emmanuel Macron is Jupiter. I'm Hermes, the messenger. France is back.
Bruno Le Maire there, the finance minister, saying that he's Hermes to Macron's Jupiter. How does that go down with Americans?
Well, traditionally the Greek gods would clash with the Titans, wouldn't they?
Yeah, there he mixed a Greek one and a Roman one. But then
yes. Well, Jupiter's just Zeus, so yes. Going back to what we were saying about how there's been signs of tension in the past between Macron and Trump, and like literal tension in the case of the handshake.
Right.
I'm sure they're both at home now with a tennis ball, limbering up for the rematch. But it's precisely because of that Macron can do this. Theresa May has had to cancel or at least postpone her visit with Trump because she's a weak leader And when she was photographed with him, it wasn't, trying to choke off his circulation through his wrist. She was holding him back gently by the hand and guiding him down some stairs like a doddering old man. She can't be seen to be too close to him anymore because she's seen as subordinate to him. But Macron is strong enough to invite Trump here, show him all the tanks and Rafale fighters and legionnaires marching down the Champs-Élysées, and people will see him for what he is, as a young man on the up.
How will Germans view Bastille Day this year? Will they be paying attention?
Oh, sure they will. Sure, of course they will. To the extent that they do or don't do that every year. But, I mean, first of all, coming back to the handshake, you have to remember Macron got double the handshake that Merkel never got. When she was in the White House, reporters were asking for a handshake, and Trump didn't listen. I think it's right to say what you said, that Macron, in a way, he has to work with Merkel, who's very dominant in Europe. Mm-hmm. And Trump is a way to have a special role. Yeah, if he's bridge building to Washington in a way. Yeah. Okay,
but is he overplaying his hand? Because
he's overplaying his hands, I think, with all this what we just heard from the minister, this Jupiter and Zeus and the king of the sun, and we
had an aide to Macron who told French newspaper Le Monde that there won't be the traditional Bastille Day interview by the French press because the issues are, quote, too complex to talk about in an interview with journalists.
Yeah, I like that because I feel very privileged because I belong to a group recently of 8 journalists who had at least an interview on European policy with Macron. So, but I mean, this if they continue with this way of arrogance, they run into deep trouble.
Did you get a sense during that interview of that arrogance? Is that from him or is that from his entourage?
Well, I didn't think he was more arrogant than ever before and less arrogant neither. I think what you see is the change is already that this presidency puts a huge load on him. I mean, he has changed. He is less spontaneous and all that. But I think Macron is here on a mission, and that's a legitimate one. And we have to also mention that a little bit the shining of this presidency has been, I wouldn't say destroyed, but certainly damaged by the last 2 presidents. We had President Bling Bling, and we had the far too normal President Hollande, who was riding scooters. So Macron...
To see his mistress.
Well, yeah,
right.
For example. We don't know what he else did. But so he has to restore the image and dignity of the presidency. I just have the feeling he's overdoing it a little bit, and he's overdoing it in a way that will haunt him.
Right.
Will haunt him?
Macron? I mean, I've quit the predictions business, I've told you before, since Trump got elected. But I don't know. I think he's a bit too arrogant. You're going to have 2 alpha males, kind of testing each other out. We'll see what it will be like. And Macron generally, I think his attitude with the press is worrisome in general. With any head of state who refuses to communicate, it's always a problem. It undermines democracy, undermines transparency,
all right,
and it's a problem.
A head of state who refuses to communicate. We've talked about the one on this side of the Atlantic. Dave Clark, your job is to cover the State Department.
Yes.
And before it was John Kerry, right? And you had all those with the Iran nuclear talks and
the Paris climate change.
Climate change.
I travelled as far south as Valparaiso.
What does your job description entail now?
Well, now I have to wait till Secretary Tillerson appoints the State Department, and then I'll cover that. And at the moment, that'll be sometime in early 2018.
Because there'll be no U.S. ambassador to Paris when Trump arrives.
No. There are 74 ambassadorial posts are currently empty. They have 1 deputy head of the State Department now, but he was appointed 2 weeks ago. There are no assistant secretaries of state.
Is this on purpose?
Yes.
What's who's doing this? Why?
Well, there's a kind of perfect storm of problems. There is. He does want to cut down the size of the department. He came in as a business leader. He wants to streamline it. Trump wants to cut money to the State Department anyway, partly to fund a massive increase in the Pentagon's already enormous budget, but also just to make government more focused. So, to put the best shine on it. So they wanted to cut jobs anyway. So rather than appointing a new lot of people, they'll just have to be sacked further down the line. They have got rid of all of the Obama political appointees and all of the senior staff from the Obama era, many of whom were appointed obviously under W. Bush. They're not all dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, but they were seen as being identified with his agenda. They're all gone, and they haven't been replaced. And then they've launched a review of US policy in several domains, which is their excuse now for waiting. But at the same time, where they have had appointees they wanted to make in the Tillerson State Department, the Trump White House has vetoed them.
And you sense that friction?
Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. The Bannon people do not want to appoint neoconservatives. In DC, a bunch of foreign policy people have to take a rest for 4 or 8 years every now and again. And all of the Republicans who have any kind of expertise in foreign policy came up with Rumsfeld and Cheney and are neoconservatives. And the Democrats obviously won't work with Tillerson. So they don't yet have a core of populist anti-globalist foreign policy experts upon which to draw. And any Republican foreign policy expert who signed the Never Trump letter, and there are many of them, will be held to that. Even I've talked to one or two who've actually privately said, "We're sorry, we do want jobs in government after all," and they were told no.
They were told no.
Yeah.
Ida Lamy mentioning the potentially fractious relationship between the French president and the press. Well, how about what's going on right now in the United States? The travel ban going into effect, somehow getting overshadowed by tweets where Trump bashes co-anchors from MSNBC, calling Mika Brzezinski, among other things, crazy, low IQ Mika. Cue, if you will, the White House press briefing.
Look, again, I think that the president is pushing back against people who attack him day after day after day. Where is the outrage on that? You guys are constantly coming and asking, like, is this okay? He does it one time. This is day after day after day. And it's not just the president. The only person that I see a war on is this president and everybody that works for him.
Aaron Zaleski, stop picking on President Trump.
It's astonishing. It's really astonishing. I think she needs to be versed in the definition of attacking. I mean, I think it's the job of the free press to call into question a president and to critique a president. But the individual that's actually launched personal attacks, not just against journalists, against numerous people, has been Trump himself.
By the way, Christian, before he comes to Paris, there's a G20 Summit in Germany next week. How does Angela Merkel host him? You mentioned her visit to Washington. What kind of welcome will he get there?
The Constitutional Court just ruled that there will be a big camp allowed in a huge park of Hamburg, and I'm pretty confident that the Germans will flood in masses this park and will do a huge demonstration against Trump, certainly because of the climate policy. I just hope it will stay peaceful. But we can't predict that. Will be a very difficult week for Germany.
All right, before the G20 summit, preparations underway for next Monday's African Union Summit, one that marks the formal and complete return of Morocco into the club of continental nations. This after decades of conflict over its annexation of Western Sahara. On the world stage, King Mohammed VI can boast growing trade and influence. Morocco's even entering the ECOWAS group of West African nations, making his country ever more that conduit between the continent and Europe. That image abroad, though, in stark contrast with the anger that spilled over the northern Rif region, where the death of a fishmonger as he tried to salvage his confiscated catch has continued to spiral. Ida Lamy, there were more demonstrations again this week in the city of Al Hoceima.
I mean, what I wanted to say overall is, as I'm comfortably sitting in your studio, exactly, hundreds of Moroccans have been jailed for peacefully protesting. Journalists have been jailed for just doing their jobs. And Europe, as you're saying, is an enabler of this, of Morocco continuing to just not let their citizens express themselves. And these protests are just they just show that everything that's been done since 2011 and the protests in 2011 have not made any significant change for people in their daily lives. Their demands are economic. They want jobs. There's been a failure in implementing reforms and economic reforms for these people, and that's what they're saying.
We saw public statements by the king himself this week chastising his own government, saying they're not going fast enough to develop the Rif region. What was your reaction to it?
I mean, the power is very centralized, so it's really interesting to hear these statements from the king, because the government responds to him, and I mean, it's up to them to put together something that works. The way the system is implemented now does not work for citizens, for these protesters, and they don't see elected officials as legitimate people for them, and they're just screaming against corruption and lack of opportunities.
Yeah, just one final question on this.
Right.
The heavy hand that you were mentioning, people arrested and all that. Why is that? Why is there always a heavy hand, it seems?
Because they're not sure how they're going to control this. The regime right now feels very secure because the way the country is being run is we want political stability. So we don't want to be Syria, we don't want to be Libya, so we have to shut down any kind of protests, and that's what they're doing. And like you said, their Western allies are fine as long as the country's stable.
All right, Aida Alami, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Dave Clark, Aaron Zaleski, Christian Wernicke. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Diptyka Laurent.
Hi, François.
All right, we'll get the assistant to bring over the computer.
It'll help because there's a lot of images to show you.
There you go. Many thanks. And the top of your agenda.
Well, we're looking at reactions to Simone Veil's death. Of course, Twitter has been flooded with tributes, condolences, and messages of admiration, really, and gratitude. A lot of people saying thank you to Simone Veil. There's one video that people have been sharing quite a lot on the internet. It dates back to 1979 when she was holding a campaign rally that was interrupted by members of the far-right National Front Party. And boy, she didn't hold back. Let's take a listen to that. Let's take a look at that video.
At the time, the National Front was a tiny little party with less than 1% of the vote.
That's right, and of course, it's no coincidence in a way that she, as a Holocaust survivor, was willing to fight back even more so. As you see, she didn't hold back. She called them little soldiers of the SS, and she really defended herself. A lot of people on Twitter are posting messages like this. You are and will remain one of the greatest ladies that France and Europe has known. Indeed, her thick skin and determination did help push through groundbreaking reforms in France, in particular legalizing abortion. What's interesting is the New York Times reminds us that she led a lot of battles in other social rights as well, maybe less known or somewhat eclipsed by that battle for legalizing abortion. She drafted legislation to expand the rights of prisoners, people with disabilities, disadvantaged children, as well as seeking to implement measures that barred discrimination and expanded health benefits. But of course, she'll be remembered as the woman who helped legalize abortion in France. And there's a great cartoon that I can't show you right now, but it's a cartoon that shows Simone Veil being buried not under a religious symbol, but the symbol of feminism, because that essentially was her greatest combat, her legacy. And what's interesting is there's a movement online now that for her to be buried at the Panthéon, which is sort of a very selective Paris mausoleum for icons of French society. And if it's the case, because it's Emmanuel Macron who'll make that decision, if it's the case, she'll be only the fifth woman to enter the Panthéon. And one user on Twitter says France owes her this much at least.
Yeah, the issue of Simone Veil, whether or not she'll be buried at the Panthéon, I saw the hashtag had started to trend this afternoon. Over in the United States, again, we were talking about it earlier, this row between Donald Trump and those co-anchors of a morning television show, sort of dominating all the other important news there, it
That's
seems.
right. And it's a battle, really, I think it's making news today because it's one of those times where you see that the media is tired of the constant assaults and attacks by the president on the left-leaning, the so-called liberal media. The Washington, those two hosts from Morning Joe, they wrote an article in the Washington Post today, essentially saying, which it was headlined, the president is not well. President Donald Trump is not well. Something's wrong up there, you know.
Dave Clark, let me ask you, the situation in the U.S. right now, when we talk about Trump versus the media, it doesn't change opinions, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, people who hate the media are going to hate the media. People who hate Trump are going to hate Trump. It just means that reporters like myself in Washington have to work a bit harder, and it's fun, to be honest. The last administration took us for granted and was quite disdainful, but this one spends all day fighting us. So, it's gladiatorial.
So hang on a sec. You're saying it's better to have combat than to be ignored.
It's boring to be spoon-fed information. It's nice to fight for it from time to time. I think it's probably bad for America in the long run, but my visa lasts for 5 years.
It'd be nice.
Well, in this Washington Post article, they essentially call the president a liar, saying his accusations are totally unfounded. And they, as I said, they say he's not well, something's wrong. And more importantly, it's disturbing that the president of the United States keeps up his unrelenting assault on women. That I'm quoting from that article there. Let's just end on one Twitter user who says, it's a White House of thugs led by a thug in chief.
All right. Pretty unequivocal there.
There we go.
Diptyque Laurent, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.